Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Star Wars Stay on Target, our regular show about all things Star Wars, getting excited about Star Wars The Force Awakens. With me today is Chris Thurston, the PC Gamer magazine. I'm Dave Bradley, I'm the group editor-in-chief of SFX and Total Film. And we're going to talk a little bit today about both the latest Star Wars news, some of the things that we're excited about in the Star Wars world, and touch a little bit on the Star Wars expanded universe, all the books, comics and games that make up the ecosystem of Star Wars. Chris, before we get there though, the news, there's a few things out today. In the last week it's been a little bit quieter. We're still excited about those Vanity Fair pictures, but writer Lawrence Kasdan said in some more material that's been released by Vanity Fair that the film's going to be tightly packed. It's going to be a shorter film. It won't outstay its welcome. Is that a good thing for you in your mind?
I think. Well, I mean, the original films are actually quite taut. Like the original trilogy is not a flabby series of movies. They kind of get in and make their point and get out again.
Yeah.
You could probably argue that Empire Strikes Back is a film that, I mean, it's my favourite Star Wars movie, but it still is a film that's so economical in kind of getting in and getting out that it almost doesn't have an ending.
Yeah. Well, or a beginning. In fact, that's the classic bridge movie.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, it's at the template, I guess, for that kind of middle of a trilogy thing.
Yeah.
Compare that to the prequels, which I don't know. Actually, I have no idea off the top of my head how long the prequels are.
Too long, mate.
Yeah, but too long. You know, with that kind of fuzz of like, well, what's going on in this film, where they have the structural of, but a little bit more of traditional cinema kind of discipline when it came to properly structuring and pacing a movie would be very welcome. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that that there's also a symptom, I think, in recent years of, if you look at like the Hobbit films, the Lord of the Rings films, the films will last about seemingly 9 hours, something like that.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been more bored than when I watched The Desolation of Smaug.
Yeah.
Lapsed into a meditative, very zen experience in some ways.
But Star Wars films, so the fact that they have an intro crawl that gets you right into it, so you don't have to have a lot of setup, and a kind of action pack. So that's good news, right? So that's good news that it's come out. But Kasdan also teased that Lando might make a return eventually. How do you feel about that?
I can totally see that happening. I mean, given that they've got everyone else back, and I think Billy Williams has been much more involved in, because didn't he play himself? Well, didn't he play himself? Sorry, the two are so inseparable in my brain. Billy D. Williams is just Lando, but didn't he play Lando in the Lego Movie? And that's a minor spoiler for the Lego Movie. But there's a very brief cameo by Lando Calrissian. I'm pretty sure they got other actors back for the.
Anthony Daniels did C-3PO in that. I think.
Oh, did he?
I think.
No, it's not Harrison Ford.
That's right.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I do think it's Billy D. Williams. So I mean, like Anthony Daniels, actually, like Peter Mayhew, who's one of those sort of Star Wars actors that have been quite active in kind of maintaining that role, because I mean, arguably, probably still the most iconic role that he's done.
Yeah. It's an important. I think it's another sign that J.J. Abrams and his team want to connect this new universe with the original trilogy.
Well, I don't think there's any ever doubt about that. Given the amount of iconography they've used already, like crashed Star Destroyers and that kind of thing, but also just bringing back the original cast, which possibly wasn't necessary. There's all those rumours going around that originally the plan wasn't to have Luke, Leia and Han in it.
Yeah.
But that was felt to be kind of so necessary at this point to kind of make that bond that I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, so I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see Billy D. Williams again.
We'll talk a little bit about that and the expanded universe and original versus prequel trilogy later. But one other piece of news: there was a tiny leaked scene of filming in a hangar. Stormtroopers, an explosion. I mean, it's seconds long. I'm assuming it's the scene that we see a little bit of in the trailer, where it looks like Finn is possibly escaping from a thing. I don't know whether you've had a chance to see that yet, but when people release little moments like that out and things sort of get away onto the internet, do you actively try and avoid them? I mean, is there any advantage to fans watching these sort of things? We don't see very much.
I don't think in that particular case, I'm not sure that there is, because there's, I mean, what information is conveyed there? It's Star Wars, and some stormtroopers have a bad time. It's not exactly news. I suppose my concern would be that if there's less, if there's such a demand to kind of see the entire film before it comes out this time, then exactly what Kasdan was saying about trying to create this kind of honed cinematic experience that doesn't overstay its welcome, that stuff is not going to be happening at this stage, right? The impression you get of the film is so misleading that you might as well just wait until.
Right, none of it's in any context, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it was. To give a counter example, like another very recent, very taut action film, Fury Road, Mad Max Fury Road.
Loved it, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Very taut, perfect length. Starts at the end almost, and then keep going. That they filmed something like 480 hours of explosions for that. You know, they're in Namibia for 6 months, and obviously it's a bit off topic, but the point is, that gives you no idea of what the content of the film's going to be, or the pace of the film's going to be,
right.
or how important that scene's going to be.
It might not even appear in the final film when something's just a leak from a
spare
set. Yeah, exactly, yeah. Absolutely. So we want to talk today a little bit about the expanded universe. So during the production of The Force Awakens, they wrote off swathes of Star Wars canon. They rewrote the canon, right? But there's a list of things that are still considered canon. Tell us a little bit about that list. What do you think about it?
So that list is kind of interesting because it's actually not titled Things That Are Still Canon. It's titled The Story of Star Wars, which is sort of like, this is the story now. And the sort of landmark moments are all the films, so starting with Phantom Menace going on, which implicitly obviously excises all of the prequels stuff, all of the Old Republic things.
That's a brilliant Star Wars story.
Yeah, exactly. What it does include, I think the first sort of extra material is post Clone Wars. That's the Clone Wars TV show,
right?
Followed by Rebels, which is still in canon. So that's they're obviously of a type. And then the rest of it is mostly new things. So it's things like Aftermath, which is coming in.
So when does book out in September?
The Tarkin stuff, I think the Vader stuff and the Lando stuff, all of those single name kind of.
With that comic series, so like Leia written by Mark Ward and Vader by
Kieran
Gillen,
yeah. Former PC gamer alumnus, Kieran Gillen. And so the list is basically new stuff and the CG TV shows.
Right.
That's the kind of what's being packaged as Star Wars.
So what that means is that a lot of the books that I read over the last 30 odd years, the Heir to the Empire and the Michael Stackpole Rogue Squadron books, that's all not canon anymore. But the prequel trilogy is.
Yeah, and this is what I was going to say, that I think one thing that's really notable is even if you pare Star Wars down to just that list, it's still tonally all over the place. Yeah. Ironically, the expanded universe with a few outliers was pretty coherent. You know, it wasn't. I mean, LucasArts had a role in maintaining the tone somewhat internally, and you know, there's lots of drama in Star Wars fandom over many years of when producers switch around at LucasArts and sort of the entire thing is tilting one way or tilting the other way. That's all gone. But broadly, you know, writers like Timothy Zahn and Michael Stackpole and Karen Traviss did quite a good job of maintaining between them a sort of tonal consistency. And that was what surprised everyone about the prequels at the time, I think, was that, hang on, this really doesn't feel like,
right.
Even though they took some ideas from the books like Coruscant, the city planet. It's a Timothy Zahn invention, and George just sort of took it and went, I'll have that, and then changed it. It was originally this sort of Blade Runner-y kind of, layered city, and there's bits of that, but obviously it's sort of prequelized. And so the prequels changed the tone of Star Wars so much that they're still almost like the older 80s and 90s expanded universe stuff fits the original trilogy quite well, and there's exceptions to that. The Marvel Star Wars comics completely all over the place as well, but mostly they all fit together tonally, and you could look at them and go, yes, I can sort of get that this is one thing, with one kind of consistent drive behind it. Keeping the Clone Wars TV series in there, even though it obviously has its fans, keeping Rebels in there, keeping prequel trilogy at all in there, means that Star Wars is still really confused. It's interesting to have this great effort to wipe the slate clean, but actually not remove the one biggest problem.
The most controversial part of it. Yeah. So you're saying they didn't go far enough. They should have just rewritten everything. And they should have
just gone back to the original trilogy. They should have actually just said, like, we're starting again, because there's we were talking earlier, and there were a lot of babies in that bathwater that they threw out, and they had already confused things by, actually, it may be illustrative to talk about what the state of the canon was before this happened. Yeah. Where you had this really awkward thing where the movies had taken some things from the books, like Coruscant, but they directly contradicted a lot of other things and created loads of problems. Like, about, we may have mentioned this in a previous episode, but the problem of why doesn't, of Luke and Leia, and like, how does Leia remember her mother when she dies almost immediately after she's born? Why doesn't Vader think to look for his son in the place where he grew up with his adoptive aunt and uncle under his own name? All these problems that kind of created by the end of the prequels, which had been handled more sensitively in the books.
Yeah.
But the line then was the films are canon. If contradicts something, the film is right. And it created this really awkward kind of situation for fans where you couldn't just cherry pick things. You had to kind of wrangle it yourself. So I get the desire to wipe it clean, but they sort of haven't done that. They've just removed a lot of stuff. Well, they haven't removed it. They've made it Star Wars Legends.
So they've relegated a lot of the older books and comics and games to the title of Legends, haven't they? So they still sort of exist in a kind of tales that were told in this universe. Kind of
yeah. In some ways, it's exciting to get new stuff that, like, you know, the First Order, the new Empire, isn't the Remnant, which is what
was the Timothy's answer, right?
Yeah. Was the notion of this, but it sounds similar, right? Like this notion of a kind of smaller but resurgent splinter faction of the Empire that keeps going.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, you know, it took the Roman Empire centuries to decline.
Like the Eastern and Western Empire of
exactly. Yeah.
And similarly, like, it's quite exciting to see a different take on what Luke does after Jedi. That stuff I'm really interested in, because, you know, there's this assumption that, you know, literally 2 weeks after that Death Star explodes, he's already refounded the Jedi Order, and there's like 16 of them already. Like, that doesn't necessarily have to be that way. You can tell different stories with that.
Yeah.
But other than that, there's nothing really about the new expanded universe stuff that's that different to what had happened before. There's no reason those, you know, the Vader comics, the Lando comics, the Tarkin stuff, that stuff couldn't have existed within the framework of the old EU. I mean, maybe they don't want it to, but it's a tricky one.
I'd say I've got a lot of time for Clone Wars, actually, the TV show. I thought it was great, and it's interesting that Dave Filoni, who was the showrunner on that, is now running Rebels. And Rebels is great. It's nice to see an animation set in the universe now that has stormtroopers in it and things. So you know, in a way, I'm pleased that those things are still canon and Rebels is still on TV. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of things that I loved that felt very Star Wars to me, like the Old Republic games, that felt more Star Wars than the prequel trilogies, and they're not there anymore.
Yeah, well, there's an amazing period in like 2002, 2003 in games for Star Wars where essentially the rush of the prequels essentially Star Wars games were amazing, then the prequels came out and they were dreck for a while. Although people forget that something like X-Wing Alliance, which is one of those classic Star Wars games, came out a month before the Phantom Menace, and it really is this sort of line of like, and now it's going to be tie-in games and games for kids and stuff.
Yeah.
Then there's an amazing period after literally everyone, I think a lot of games developers realised prequels aren't good. Yeah. So you get within a couple of years each other. Old Republic, which is this amazing reconstruction of Star Wars, really, like, is arguably one of the cleverest Star Wars stories in the way it takes all that stuff from what made the original stories interesting and completely reconfigures them and pioneered this notion of setting the story 4,000 years before so they could do what they wanted. But also things like the Jedi Knight series of games as well, which had this character in Kyle Katarn who went from being this sort of like cipher, basically like the oldie Han Solo, to being you know, a character people liked, transitioned into other media and became a sort of fan favourite thing. And again, a story that ultimately kind of captured set pieces and stuff people liked from the original movies without the kind of day-glow dreck that had set in the Clone Wars movie. And all that stuff is gone now, and that's a sort of, or at least it's now, you know, Elseworlds, it's Legends, it's whatever you want to call it. Like, and that seems like they've got a lot of work to do to recapture stuff of that quality within that story, to flesh out that, for them to make that universe feel like there's a lot going on again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, that's a good point about fleshing out the universe. So, everyone at the moment in cinema is trying to create franchises that have interconnected universes. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is the sort of model for this. You know, there's a film every year. They all add up to the Avengers universe. There's TV shows like S.H.I.E.L.D. and so on. They connect. DC have that. I mean, even things like Fast and Furious really are creating. Do you know what I mean? They're creating this sort of ecosystem to it.
It's so funny, but they are.
But arguably, Star Wars was their first, wasn't it? I mean, hasn't Star Wars been doing this since '77 across comics and all the transmedia stuff, basically, and then a series of films and things? And
in terms of transmedia, I think, well, you know, I think in the case of the Marvel universe, you can just say, well, they're just doing what comics did in the '60s, right? The comics always had a shared universe thing. I think Star Wars was the first movie to spin out that successfully to the extent that people could just read the books, for example. Although, arguably, that's simply because Star Wars was so big, it had to keep going. Like, there needed to be an expression for all of that potential merchandise somewhere.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, thank you very much, Chris, for your time today, and thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week, next Monday, for more from Star Wars Stay on Target. Until then, may the Force be with you.